Thank you for turning to page 121. Today we're going to take a look at some very nice supplements from a company called Gamelords Limited. They were around briefly from about 1980 to about 1983-84. We're going to take a look at what they offered for Traveler during that time. It's quite a few things. I'll go into a little bit of the history of Gamelords. I do not have every Gamelords product. I only have a handful of it, about half. But I'll talk about the Gamelords, what was in each of the supplements. I'm not going to look inside every supplement. I'm just going to show the ones I have. And then I'll tell you how you can get yours on PDF for CD-ROM or thumb drive, however you want it. So we'll do that later in the video. Also, subscribers, come on in. We talk about games here a lot. Let's enjoy that. I've got a Patreon going with an active reward, so please take a look at that. If there's anything you can do to help out the channel, that'd be fantastic. End of commercial, back to important stuff. We're going to start Gamelords. Gamelords Limited, including the famous Lee's Guide to Interstellar Adventure, today on page 121. Gamelords Limited formed in 1980, and they published some of their own D&D type games. I'm not saying that they were a D&D knockoff, because they weren't. They were just in the era where a lot of companies were publishing D&D type games. And they published a couple of supplements that you could have translated to AD&D back in the early 80s. But in 83, as FASA stopped publishing and supporting and publishing Traveler, Gamelords picked up this is in 82, I'm sorry, Gamelords picked up where FASA was leaving off and excitedly got the Keith brothers involved, and we got some really nice stuff from Gamelords. This company published from 82 to about 84, and then the company itself folded. But these are wonderful. These are available on Drive-Thru RPG, about $5 a shot, and they're also available through Far Future Enterprises on thumb drive or CD-ROM, depending on your preference. That's through Mark Miller's site. I'll put a link to both below. As you can see, I got this copy and several others at Royal Hobby for 50 cents. I've told the story before. Royal Hobby is up in Rockford, Illinois. I was up there on a weekend with my wife once. We were driving down the street. I saw the sign for Royal Hobby and said, I'm going in. I went in, found out they were closing out all their Traveler stuff. This would have been about 89. Closing out all their Traveler stuff. I came out with a big brown shopping bag full of Traveler stuff that I had not seen around much, if at all. And it was a fantastic, lucky find. 50 cents a shot, $1 a shot for most of the stuff. I think I walked out of the store for around $30, and I had a 12-inch stack of Traveler stuff to read. Stuff I'm still going through, so it's a good problem to have. But the Gamelord stuff was nice. I remember I did pick up one or two of these back when they were released, beyond that lucky find at Royal Hobbies. Royal Hobbies, by the way, in Rockford, Illinois, is still around. So they have a web presence, if you want to go take a look at them. I haven't been up there since that one time I was in there, but I was very happy. So here in this one, we get Lee's Guide to Interstellar Adventure. And this was kind of a primer of how you're going to go ahead and be a traveler. And just kind of give us an idea of, and this is based on the Galactic Travels of retired Naval Admiral Aramis P. Lead. So it's kind of interesting. It talks here about Harry Harrison's Death World trilogy. Fun read if you like that. And Frank Herbert's Dune, one of my favorite books. And several Star Trek episodes. All their appeal to the character, to the common premise of the heroes are thrust into an unexpected situation completely new, an alien, a situation which must be understood before it can be changed or at least escaped. So it's about learning and exploring is what they're saying, and that's what this is all about. So we have our first adventure, our first world called Scavenger Hunt, and then we go on to Hide and Seek and several others. And I love the early 80s type print. I don't know what this font is, but I know it's early 80s, and it was emblematic of small press companies at the time. I don't know if it's dot matrix or not. I'm not the expert on that stuff, but it still takes me back to a fun time when all this stuff was new. So that's Lee's Guide, probably the most famous of all the stuff that Gamelords gave out. Then we have the Drenselar Quest, and here's where the William H. Keith comes in, and J. Andrew Keith, his brother. They started publishing a lot of their work through Gamelords. This would have been 83. It was design and development by William H. Keith, original concept, J. Andrew Keith. And then, so it's, and Gamelords was out of Gaithersburg, Maryland. So we just get a really nice adventure here. I love the Keith Brothers stuff, and I'm amazed. Here we are nearly 40 years later on this particular adventure. The Keith Brothers stuff holds up pretty well. It's still worth reading. Of course, you have to modify it based on which edition of Dune you're playing. Dune, wow. Which edition of Traveler you're playing. But it still does hold up pretty well conceptually. They were kind of breaking away. In the early 80s, there was a tendency, no matter what the game, to kind of mimic D&D, and a lot of things were dungeon crawls and stuff, and the Keith Brothers kind of broke away from that a little bit. Here we have Ascent to Anachthor by J. Andrew Keith. We're chasing a thrill-seeking daredevil. With a team of experienced adventurers by her side, Lady Sandra sets out on a dangerous quest, the Ascent to Anachthor. Complete adventure for Traveler, making use of the rules presented in the mountain environment from Gamelords. They did a lot of environment books. Here's one of them, the Desert Environment. It's the only one I have a print copy of. And these were kind of neat because they gave you rules we didn't have for Traveler. Interestingly, these are listed at 50 cents each. That's what I paid for them. But there's a pencil marking right there. This originally was $6.95. So I got very lucky. And the Desert Environment gave us an environment we hadn't been in yet. So if you're a big fan of the novel Dune, of course the recent first part of the movie release, which by the way is very faithful to the book. I'm a bit of a stickler for that stuff, and I was very happy with it. So 1984 for this, and this is before the Keith Brothers would go back to FASA and start writing for BattleTech. So this is kind of their in-between gig. The Keith Brothers, famously from Oak Lawn, Illinois. They lived about a mile from where my wife grew up. She didn't know them. But their house was actually just a block or two from one of the players that's in my group, Mike. He lived right by them. I don't think he knew them either. And then we get the Pilot's Guide to Drexelthar Subsector, again by J. Andrew Keith. And again, these are not all the books that were published by Gamelords. This one, this guy, Ascent to Anachthor, is one of the ones I bought just off the shelf back in '84. I just thought it looked interesting. The Pilot's Guide, again, it's just a nice look at a bunch of different sectors. Now, keep in mind, a lot of this stuff is no longer canon, and it's changed, and I'm not a big one who worries about canon. I'm certainly interested in canon, and I will read stuff for canon, but I'm not going to set something aside and say, well, I can't use this anymore, it's no longer canon. If nothing else, I'll mine it for ideas. Very often I'll ignore the canon entirely and just go ahead and have some fun with it. So this one, Wanted Adventurers, was one I really wanted to get my hands on. I remember seeing ads for it, probably in Dragon Magazine, when it was out. And this guy is the last of the ones that they published. Looks like it was published in '84. And it's a collection of short adventure situations for Traveler. And this is the one that really grabbed my attention because I like little things like this. I like the want ads in here. I thought these were really cool. I think my original GM for Traveler, the guy who introduced me to it, I think he had this one because I remember thumbing through this before I owned it and really liking the want ads. The idea that you would do a paper want ad is pretty cool. Of course, you wouldn't now. We have the internet, and of course, in space, we'll have whatever. But here you go. Here's hire yourself out as bodyguards, security personnel, veterans. And again, all this stuff still translates to whatever you're doing with Traveler at all. It's any version of Traveler, you can bring this stuff over. As you can see, there's not a lot of rules in here. Well, these were pretty system agnostic, not the environment books. These had a lot of the first edition Traveler rules in them of necessity, you know, surviving in the desert, but they tried to stay as rules clean as they could, even though Traveler at the time only had the classic edition, and that's what makes these kind of timeless. So I do recommend picking these up. If you don't have them, I do recommend picking them up. The Keith brothers wrote a good book. This one's by John Marshall. Uh, these were nice little products from Gamelords. I remember seeing them as I was buying my Game Designers Workshop Traveler stuff back in the day. I remember seeing the various Lee's guides. But again, it was a matter of money. I didn't always have the money to buy all the Traveler stuff I could. I grabbed one or two when I could, and then I got lucky at that Royal Hobby sale back in the late 80s. So that's it for the Gamelords today. One other thing I want to mention is Mongoose has posted a State of the Mongoose on their web page. It's right in their front page. Just type in Mongoose Publishing and you'll go right to it. And it's talking about what's coming for 2023. And I'm pretty darn excited. I, at this time, am only buying Mongoose Traveler from them. I'm not buying any of the other games. They have Traveler 2300. They have Paranoia, which I still am on the fence about. I talked to my players if we want to get into Paranoia or not. And funny enough, they seem a little paranoid about it. They said they weren't certain that was something that we wanted to dive into. So I haven't decided on that one yet. But they have a couple other game systems that they're coming up. Shield Maidens is a new one that was just under Kickstarter. That'll be launching soon. But anyway, it gives us a state of all the games and what's coming out with a big section on what's going to be new for Traveler for 2023. And among other things, we find out that the 5th Frontier War is going to happen in 2023. We're going to get the start of it. So they're going to advance the timeline, and we're going to go into the 5th Frontier War. So as kind of a primer for that, since they haven't given any kind of release information on that, I'm going to take a look at some of the 5th Frontier War stuff that was exciting and important back in Classic Traveler. And I'll be doing that over the next few months. So just to kind of set the table a little bit. So that's it. That's all I've got today from page 121. I hope you liked it. I recommend getting your hands either, if you can find these on eBay. I think I've seen them a couple of times. They're fairly pricey, but the PDFs alone are completely worth it. And they're under Apocrypha 1 from Far Future Enterprises, and then available individually on Drive-Thru RPG. I'll post a link to both below. So that's it. That's all I've got today from page 121. I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't, and take a look at the Patreon, and I'll see you next time on page 121.